All right. All right. Happy Friday. And we are finally live on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and other platforms. I'm sorry I'm a little bit late tonight. If you subscribe to my YouTube channel, you probably got the announcement that I would be live at 7. Then I bumped it back to 7:30. Then I bumped it back to 7:40, and it's 7:49 and I'm finally fucking live. I do apologize for the delay. Just running around trying to get everything ready for the show, but also trying to take care of things in my life, like eating and, those things that we all have to do. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you all had a great week. In this show, we're going to be talking about the latest regarding that cannabis odor-proof bill that I've been discussing on the show for quite some time. Boy, I think it's been years at this point now, at least the topic. Of course, this legislation has been introduced a few different times, and this is the furthest it has ever gone. So, I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're excited to hear the latest. A little bit of good news. A little bit of good news. It seems like it's good news, but with other things, the further I dig, it doesn't seem perhaps as great as I once thought. It well, we'll get into it right after this message.
Sun-Drenched Farm is the manifestation of my dream to be able to provide for my family through offering natural alternative forms of healing and wellness, the same forms that I've been so fortunate to experience on my journey in healing from Lyme disease. With in-house cultivation, solventless extraction, and final product manufacturing, we're able to offer the highest quality product that you can find now at sundrenchedfarm.com.
And once again, we are live right now. We're so fucking live that if you comment on YouTube or X, I can display your comment on screen like I'm doing with this comment right now. Some cat on the internet, which is their username, says, "Greetings, fellow fellow humans." Greetings, some cat on the internet. Thank you for stopping by and dropping a comment. And if you are listening live or after the fact right now, make sure you hit that like button. It would be greatly appreciated. We got a great show for you today. We're going to be talking about that cannabis odor proof bill. I'll be sharing some clips you may not have seen yet, which is exciting. It's always fun to have clips to share. Somebody named Cole Cram just commented and said, "What up? What up? Yo, what's up, Cole? How's it going? Nice to see a fellow Cole out there." Yeah, once again, if you are tuning in live or even if you're watching after the fact, hit that like button, subscribe, and if you do that, if you subscribe, that's probably one of the best ways to make sure that you can check out the live streams in the future. If you subscribe to the YouTube channel, I always try to announce it. I try to post the live as soon as I can. And other things I've started to do now is like make an actual post announcement on YouTube so that you might not miss it. If you're wondering how to subscribe to the YouTube channel, I'd say the best way is probably to head on over to colememo.com/YouTube, which will present you with a button, which if you click on that button, it'll take you to my YouTube channel where you can subscribe so that you never miss a stream. The podcast is also available on all podcasting platforms, including SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and other podcasting platforms. Just as a quick reminder, one of the best ways to support the show is by going to colememo.com/Patreon. It's just $3 a month to become a member, and members get access to episodes before they come out to the public. I've got some really awesome ones that I'm about to release. I should have released them like yesterday. Maybe I'll release them tonight. I don't know. One with Ray Long, who's been reporting on Illinois politics for quite a long time. I think like 30 plus years. He literally wrote the book on Michael Madigan, which is one of the most powerful politicians in the United States, let alone Illinois. So check that out. That episode's going to be awesome. We're going to be diving into the slow pace of ethics reform in Illinois politics, despite the fact that a growing number of public corruption convictions have come about in recent years. And just a quick heads up, if you do sign up at colememo.com/Patreon, Not only will you be notified when new articles drop, I dropped a new article. We'll be discussing some of the contents of that article in today's show, but you'll also get episodes before they release to the public. I think I already said that. If you are going to sign up, if you're on an Apple device, I recommend signing up from a computer or a non-Apple device because Apple adds extra fees on top of the very fair price of what I feel is a very fair price of $3 a month for access to my content. So if you sign up from a non-Apple device and then you sign in on your Apple device, you can watch my content and keep that price to $3 a month. Ultimately, all of my episodes released for free on public feeds. But if you'd like to support the show and get early access to episodes before they release to the public, consider becoming a member at colememo.com/Patreon. That's colememo.com/Patreon. It does cost a lot to do this show, but if Patreon's not your thing, you can always make a one-time monthly or yearly contribution at colememo.com/support. That's right. You can literally donate $2 if you wanted to at colememo.com/support. And if you can't support the show financially, that is totally fine. Again, as I said at the start of the show, one of the best ways to help support the show and get it in front of other people's eyes is by smashing that like button, sharing it with your friends, that might go without saying, or just leaving a positive review from wherever you're listening to this from. That's super, super helpful. Let's jump into the latest news, which is the fact that cannabis odor bill has passed a House committee. I've been bringing it up. I've been saying, look, folks, fill out these witness slips. We're going to get it through the House committee. We got it through the Senate committee. We got it through the Senate. So now what should have been next is it would go to the House. Ideally, the House would vote to pass it. And then it would go to Governor Pritzker. But unfortunately, it's not sounding like it's going to be that straightforward. And that is what we will be talking about in this episode of
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memorandum.
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memorandum.
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memo is what allows this whole thing to go on.
I mean, you have to respect the memo.
Hey, this is Tommy Chong, and you're listening and watching The Cole Memo.
Oh, things are never that straightforward in Illinois. I already know that's what you're thinking right now. Hey, if you're tuned in live right now, you can comment below and we can display your comment. Someone's saying it's important that even if you catch the live stream for YouTube, you need to stop back by the tape show, watch a bit, and upfist it. The YouTube algorithm gives more weight to taped shows. I didn't know that. Well, that's cool. So yeah, if you're watching this after the fact, please still smash that like button. And if you've been curious about trying federally legal cannabis drinks that ship right to your door, I've got a brand for you. I love this brand. It's Cantrip. I like their 50 milligram orange sodas. And if you said, yikes, 50 milligrams, that's not for me, no worries. They've got lighter dosages. If you also said, I'm not a big fan of orange soda, well, hey, they've got colas, they've got root beer, seltzers, and more. They've got low doses, they've got high doses, they've got some with CBD in it, and you can get a 15% discount if you buy them at drinkcantrip.com/colememo. 15% gets kicked back to me, which I'll probably use to buy some more soda because I love these fucking drinks. There's nothing better than being able to go to family members' houses. And look, sometimes I'll just step out and blaze it anyways, but there's nothing like knocking back a THC drink right in front of your grandma, and she has no idea what's going on because the smell of cannabis is not present. You're just sipping a drink. She doesn't know any different. Anyways, once again, that's drinkcantrip.com/colememo. And before we get into the latest, I want to just give a recap on this whole odor-proof container bill. So back in May of 2024, which is hard to believe that was a year ago. That's really kind of crazy to think about. There was a omnibus introduced, and you may have heard of this omnibus. A lot of talk around this one. Despite its support base, the bill encountered opposition from influential stakeholders. According to the Illinois Cannabis Equity Coalition, Green Thumb Industries, a licensed cannabis operator, actively opposed the measure due to a provision relating to allowing medical cannabis patients to shop at any dispensary. And as a result, CEIC called for a boycott on GTI. Now, what didn't get a lot of press was, but I covered it in this article that I'm displaying on my screen right now. And by the way, just a little bit of housekeeping. I always try to include links to whatever I cover on the show. And I don't get the sense that it's a huge deal for people, but it's a big deal for me. I want you to be able to see things for yourself, do your own research. And so if you are watching this live right now, I always try to go back. Maybe I could be better about it, but I do go back and I add a link to the full show notes so that you can do research yourself. And but you know, if it's not up there, if you're not seeing it, for example, I'll just share my screen again really quick. I recently did an episode with Jason Brown from Illinois News Joint. And if you look at this episode, you can see the description and then you can see some of the links mentioned during the show. You know, some of the stories we cover. We specifically covered the Illinois Department of Agriculture and this little database that they produced with the whole list of craft growers. And again, I share this and I put the work in to put all that stuff in the show notes so that if you want to do the research yourself, you can. So just wanted to make that little small housekeeping note. Let's get back to the article I was just describing, which you can find at colememo.com. One of the things that did not get much press at all, I don't remember anybody actually talking about this, is the fact that the Illinois Sheriff's Association raised concerns about the cannabis omnibus, citing language that related to the odor of cannabis. And actually, why don't we watch that clip? So basically, just again, this is good background before we get to what happened today and share some of these clips that you may not have seen in the media yet. In 2020, the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act officially became the law of the land. Prior to the new law taking effect, not a lot of people know this, the possession of 10 grams or less of cannabis was punishable by a small civil fine between $100 and $200, and that was it. You could have a joint in your ear, you know, like tucked behind your ear, and it was just like a small civil fine. But when the new law took effect in 2020, the law that everybody said legalized cannabis, that same exact activity, having a joint tucked behind your ear, became a Class A misdemeanor, right? So that's punishable with up to a year in jail. That you can get some fines for that. And that's all because if you had a joint behind your ear, the cannabis would not be in a sealed, child-proof, odor-proof container. Now, here's an issue. There's no such thing as an odor-proof container. It's self-evident that the products, which are prepackaged, are not odor-proof, and that's why the scent of cannabis is detectable if you ever go to a dispensary. If you go to a dispensary and you're smelling cannabis, I always like to say there's not a bunch of wizards packing it up in the back room. All of the products arrive prepackaged, which means that the reason you can smell cannabis in a cannabis dispensary is because the packaging is not odor-proof, which means that the moment you purchase it and get into your car, you're out of compliance with the law because it's supposed to be in an odor-proof container, but they're not sold in odor-proof containers. I know it's literally impossible. It's a law that is impossible to comply with. And I always like to say that if you Google the term odor-proof container, you're going to find some. You're going to find containers that claim to be odor-proof. And what I would say is those containers are good at mitigating odor. The question is odor-proof to who or to what? Law enforcement, as we'll cover in a little bit, has testified that they use dogs, which have 10,000 to 100,000 times the sense of smell that humans do, right? And so that's a problem. Again, odor-proof to who? Odor-proof to what? It's a whole thing. And I'll just quickly say that if there was such a thing as an odor-proof container, law enforcement would not be using canines. There would be no reason to use canines. That's why they use canines. Anyways, so this was the testimony that law enforcement gave on the cannabis omnibus with regard to the odor of cannabis. So basically, the cannabis omnibus, in case you didn't know, is a bill. An omnibus is a bill that has like several provisions in it that may or may not be related. In this case, they're related in the subject of cannabis, but there were several provisions like increasing canopy size, allowing medical patients to shop at all dispensaries, as we were just covering with the whole GTI boycott. There were other subjects I honestly can't even remember. But the point is an omnibus is kind of like a catch-all bill that people will introduce so that they can knock out, so they can get two birds stoned, as I like to say, instead of two birds, one stone. Anyways, you probably heard that one before. Um, Law enforcement had some objections about a provision within the omnibus that would remove the odor proof language from the Illinois cannabis law, which again is impossible to comply with. Let's watch the clip where they object to that.
Very much.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to invite the opposition up. Jim Kychuk from Illinois Sheriffs.
Sorry for the dead air.
Thank you, members of the committee, Madam Chair. Jim Kychuk on behalf of the Illinois Sheriff's Association. Really, our issue is pretty simple. It's on page 325. It's at the very end of the bill, and it's regarding the elimination of the odorless container. My understanding, though, and I don't want to speak out of turn here, but there is going to be a change to that will be reinserted. Is that, if that's correct? And that would remove our opposition.
Would that remove the opposition of the chiefs of police and everybody else?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And Leader Lightford, you will be making that amendment?
Yes, it was an oversight.
Sounds good. And I'm assuming that amendment would go straight to the floor?
That's the goal.
Thank you.
And so right now it's just struck. We'll just add it back.
Thank you. With that, I will open it up for discussion.
All right. So that is when law enforcement initially opposed legislation like this. I believe there has been legislation like this in the past because I spoke to a lawyer that helped to kind of craft that legal language. But it never made it as far as this did. And again, this ultimately got struck, which was super disappointing. But, you know, it's the way that things go sometimes. Again, I wish it would have gotten more coverage at the time. I'm not going to complain because it ultimately, the coverage kind of swung back around with some rulings from the Illinois Supreme Court. And I do, if I recall correctly, when this topic was discussed around the time of the omnibus, somebody in some hearing sort of acknowledged like, hey, we're waiting on these Supreme Court rulings and we'll address this via legislation if the Supreme Court doesn't address it. The idea being if the Supreme Court addresses it, problem solved. We didn't have to do anything. If they don't address it, then, well, we'll take a look at it. I can't remember where I saw that, and if I find it, I'll try to add it to the show notes. Like I said, that was a year ago. It's hard to keep up with everything. Our friend Genetic Memory Farms just commented and said, good evening, good peeps. I hope you're all safe and stoned. Likewise, my friend. Okay, so let's move forward a little bit more. In September of 2024, the Illinois Supreme Court ruled that the odor of burnt cannabis is insufficient for a search. But in a move that the Chicago Tribune called or described as unusual, the court started by consolidating two cases with opposing appellate rulings, only to later separate them for individual decisions. So this was the first individual decision, which ruled that the odor of burnt cannabis was insufficient to search a vehicle. So, kind of an interesting ruling. A lot of people started to ask me around this time, Cole, does that mean if I just blaze up in my car that cops can't search the vehicle? You'd think that, but I don't think, and this kind of gets into the whole crux of this issue, I don't think cops or anybody for that matter can tell the difference between the smell of burnt and unburnt cannabis. Now, look, I'll back away from that a little bit. Sometimes I can tell the difference between the smells. Sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, somebody's been burning cannabis in here. But honestly, there are days where you can fool me And I always like to say I've been studying this plant for years, and by studying, I mean, smoke it, blazing it. And you could fool me sometimes. You could fool a lot of people. I remember I used to get in trouble when I was in high school and should not have been smoking. And I'd be rolling up in my room, and I'd have the joint rolled up and away. And my parents would come in and be like, "You've been smoking in my fucking house," and I'd be like, "No, I." It was really hard. This basically meant nothing to them. I would try to say, "No, I was just preparing it to be smoked in your house. I'm not that disrespectful." Of course, it did not mean a lick of difference to them. Their house smelled like weed, and they did not want it to smell like weed. My bad. So anyways, I think that's really the crux of this issue. And by the way, if you go to this article and you look at the little table of contents here, there's point number 6, and it says legal insights. 2 professionals break down the details of this case. And yeah, I actually had 2 legal professionals come on the show, 2 licensed attorneys, and we discuss it. And I think it's a really good conversation. So if you don't want to hear it from me, a layman, you can hear it from some actual, you know, legal professionals. Because I am not that. I don't know if you've picked up on that at all, but I am not a legal professional. Okay, so somebody commented and said, as long as cops can still arrest you, they have no objections to cannabis. Yeah, straight up. So to keep this moving, and we'll get closer to where we are today, and then we'll break some news, share some clips. In December of 2024, the Illinois Supreme Court upheld the odor-proof cannabis container law, which was really, really disappointing. But they did acknowledge that they said, we are mindful of pending legislation where the Senate has proposed an amendment to Section 11502.15 of the Vehicle Code that would provide the odor of burnt or raw cannabis in a vehicle by itself shall not constitute probable cause for the search of a motor vehicle or person. So, and also in the dissenting opinion, the Supreme Court basically encouraged the Illinois legislature to take up this issue and solve it, make it so that these rulings weren't conflicting. Oh no, failed to load a PDF. Ah, there we go. Look, yeah. You can see the whole ruling. I actually upload it to my site. Gotta love those primary source documents. And once again, if you'd like to see some legal professionals cover this, if you scroll down, you can see a section that says, what does this actually mean? And you can see a little link here that says, I discussed the implications of this ruling with legal professionals on episode 151 of the Cole Memo podcast. So if you want some more legal opinions, that's where you can go to find it. And if you want to read more about this case, there you go. So one thing to keep in the back of your mind as we move forward is that in this ruling, the Supreme Court did encourage the General Assembly to take up this issue. And you'll notice in the clips that we watched today, lawmakers acknowledge that. So again, just keep that in the back of your head. And once again, we are live right now. So as we go along, if you have any questions or comments, drop them below and I can display them on screen and make sure that I'm answering your questions as we move through this. So on February 23rd, this is when the Illinois Senate officially started to take up Senate Bill 42, which is that legislation that I believe the Supreme Court ruling was acknowledging in footnote number 7, where they say, we're mindful of pending legislation in the Senate where they've proposed an amendment to the section of the law that makes it so that the odor of burnt or raw cannabis in the vehicle by itself shall not constitute probable cause for the search of a motor vehicle. So, in case you didn't know, the way that legislation moves, it's got to go through a committee, then it goes to the chamber, and then it would have to go through the opposite chamber's committee, through the chamber, and then it can become law. So in this case, it started in a Senate committee, right? And that's what we're about to discuss briefly, of course, because you can check out my full coverage on it in this article that I'm displaying on my screen right now and that I should have linked in the show notes. A lot of wild stuff in this hearing, and I do encourage you to check this article I wrote because it includes a lot of details that nobody else has really reported on. I happened to be in the room, so I took some really detailed notes, ran it by some other people that were in the room to ensure that I heard what I heard, and ultimately, that's how I came up with this article. And yeah, there's a lot of wild stuff in here, including the fact that law enforcement brought their own cannabis container to the hearing. And they basically said, look, here's a jar of cannabis. Can anybody smell it? No. Okay, well, that's proof that you can have an odor proof container. Well, first of all, this looks like the most mid of mid I have ever seen in my life. Like, this weed is bad even for Illinois standards. I don't know. Maybe it's right on target. I'm just joking. I'm just dissing on the dispensaries. But if you zoom in on this, like I've done, and unfortunately, I didn't notice this while I was in the hearing, but there's something really peculiar about this container, setting aside the fact that it's not branded. It's labeled as an edible product. If you look very closely here, it says red raspberry gummies, 100 milligrams. I don't know where they got this product, but it would have had to, as I say in the article, a cultivation center may have mislabeled the product, resulting in a dispensary unknowingly selling it under the wrong classification, which admittedly seems very unlikely. Um, Law enforcement may have presented the product in a misleading way. There may also be another explanation that is yet to surface, but without speculating further, it's difficult to determine what that might be. I have reached out to people that work for this company, not official representatives, but just people that have worked in like cultivation centers and such, and they told me that they've never sold any cannabis in a container like this before. So I've also heard from industry professionals that this label that's on the lid uh, is not the label that you put on products in dispensaries. I was actually told that this was like an inventory label, like from a back room, that like this label is never on products. I don't know. I could be wrong. If you're in the industry and know more than me, please comment below. But that's what some of the industry people told me. And it adds up. I'm trying to look around and see if I have a dispensary container around here. And of course I don't. But when you buy a product from a dispensary, it usually shows the testing date, the harvest date, where it's from, and all this says is the name of the product, and it's got like a barcode, which I guess adds up if people said this is like something that they use for inventory. They're probably scanning that for inventory. I don't know though. I'm not at this point. I'm just speculating. This stuck out to me, and there was a lot of crazy stuff mentioned in this particular hearing. They said a lot of crazy things. This was the hearing that I was referencing at the beginning of the show, where they actually brought in a retired officer who identified as an expert with 24 years of experience in handling canines, and he testified about the capabilities of police dogs. He stated that canine officers possess an odor detection capacity that is 10,000 to 100,000 times greater than that of an average human. And they basically testified that fentanyl being laced into marijuana is something that's a major concern, which I don't see how odor proof helps with that. But anyways, somebody commented and said, it looks like it might have had one bud in the jar. I've never seen gummies packaged like that in a dispensary. Yeah, no, that was flour. That was kind of the whole point. Sorry if I didn't make that clear. That picture that I was showing, they said that the way that they described it was, they said, well, we went to a dispensary and we bought this product and you can't smell it, right? And when you tell me that, and I look at this product and I see that it's labeled as a gummy, I start to question, did you actually go to a dispensary? And if you did, why did you rip off their labeling? Like, they're usually a company has like branding on the package. I don't know. just there's a lot of questions with this packaging, so I thought it was notable to mention in this article. Anyways, though, despite all of the crazy shit that was said, and by the way, I also testified at this hearing, and you can see my full testimony right here, which I think is pretty solid. You can hear about a little bit of a back and forth that I had with a senator and so much more. Again, I'm just trying to wisp the surface. Ultimately, this bill passed the Senate committee, which meant, as a reminder, that it could go to the Senate chamber. And it did, and it passed the Senate, the Illinois Senate. So I don't know if I wrote about that. I meant to pull that article up. I'm just, I'll show you this, how I searched the website. I'm searching up odor proof right now. You can see I talk about it a lot on the show. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not seeing it. Let me try one more search. Senate. Well, here is a good episode that I did on. Here it is. Illinois Senate advances bill to curb cannabis-based traffic stops. House consideration up next. So I basically wrote about it, and it looks like it must have passed around April 10th, 2025. I don't know. I could be wrong about it. That's at least when I wrote about it. Anyways, that brings us to today, sort of. Let me just give a little bit of background. In case you've been watching the show, I've been saying for a while now, you got to fill out witness slips. That's helpful. It was helpful, at least in the Senate committee, where we had more people that filed as proponents than law enforcement who filed as opponents. The witness slips, in case you didn't know, is like your chance as a person to participate directly in the legislative process. And if you can't make it to Springfield, you can actually testify via Zoom. I will say, look into the rules on that. I found out the hard way that you have to submit that request to testify remotely at least 24 hours in advance, which is pretty challenging because sometimes you don't hear about the hearing happening until the day of, which means that you're already behind that 24 hours in advance timeline, and then you can't participate virtually, which is exactly what happened to me. Pretty whack, in my opinion. But anyways, somebody said, sounds like the opposing testimony, quote, "we bought it this way," end quote, is perjury. I don't know. It's not like a official court hearing or anything. Like, I don't know. Maybe you can perjure yourself. I don't know. Someone else said, I did not know about witness slips. Have to check my state rules. Oh, are you from Illinois? Even if you are and you hadn't heard about it, no sweat. I was not very familiar with the concept either. I'm not going to sit here and be like, you didn't know about witness slips? Everybody knows about witness slips. Most people don't know about witness slips. But part of this show is trying to educate everybody on the process that I've started to learn, which is the political process. I've been jokingly saying cannabis is a gateway drug to politics because by paying attention to this subject, I've had to learn a little bit about politics. If you haven't already, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Comment below and we can display your comments on screen like we've seen some people. It's showing me that there's like 35 people at least tuned into this. So drop your comments. Even if it's just a fire emoji, I would appreciate it. Okay, let's talk about how we got to where we are today, and I'll display the screen or the article that I wrote on my screen. This article I released today contains a lot of information that I've not seen reported anywhere else. But before we get to that, just really briefly, this hearing that was supposed to happen has been rescheduled multiple times. And in fact, the hearing that happened this morning, A lot of the people that I know that have been tracking this very closely didn't even know it was going to happen. Weren't able to make it. I wasn't able to make it. I like making it to these things. It's fun. But that just seems like how the process works, and I don't I don't know exactly how it gets decided when things go to committee, but I get the sense that people only bring things up to committee if they're for sure it's going to pass, or maybe even perhaps if they're for sure they're going to kill something, right? I could be wrong on that though. I'm learning. I want to just reiterate that I am learning. So let's talk about this article. And it looks like we got a comment in. Someone said, not from Illinois, but your podcast and cannabis legalization news are both good sources. Yeah, I love cannabis legalization news. Tom and Miggy have been on this show in the past, and maybe we'll have them back on in the future. Anyways, okay. So today, the hearing finally happened, and the legislation passed. But as I write, a compromise, in my opinion, could undermine its intent. So, if the original language of SB 42 is passed into law, just as a quick reminder, if it wasn't clear enough already, the legislation would prohibit law enforcement from using the smell of cannabis, raw or burnt, as the sole reason to search a vehicle. In other words, the smell of cannabis could be used in the totality of circumstances. So let's say you have a tail light out, I guess, or you don't use your turning signal. I get the impression that if you don't use your turning signal and your car reeks of cannabis, that could be used in the totality of circumstances to then search your vehicle. Let's say you're swerving, driving recklessly. Yeah, that can be used as part of the totality of the circumstances. So today, and this is where we'll get to clips, this is how the hearing started off. This is the sponsor from the House, Representative Curtis Tarver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Let me just start with the end in mind. My goal.
And I just wanted to say really quick, the audio fluctuates on this, and I do apologize for that. Some of them it's kind of quiet. I tried to boost the audio on some of these clips if I could, but it's challenging. So if you're having to adjust your volume, I really do apologize. It's all over the place, but just wanted to, share some things you may not have seen today. These are your elected representatives at work. So without further ado, House Representative Curtis Tarver, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Let me just start with the end in mind. My goal in the most ideal situation is to move this to second, to hold it on second, and to continue to work with my colleagues and law enforcement, more specifically, toward a path. This bill is the result of many things, not the least of which are two court cases from the Illinois Supreme Court. And I'm going to read this to quote what kind of the issue is here. It's talking about burnt cannabis being transported in a vehicle versus raw cannabis being transported in a vehicle. One of the things it suggests is that the legislature consider amending the Regulation Act as well as the Vehicle Code, as both statutes govern how an individual may possess cannabis within a motor vehicle on an Illinois highway. Because both the Vehicle Code and the Regulation Act regulate the possession of cannabis in a motor vehicle on the highway, consistency between the two laws is essential so that users of cannabis know how to possess cannabis without violating laws, and so police officers know when they have the probable cause to enforce laws. So right now the question is really more about warrantless searches and probable cause. I will again say this bill is not the solution. I think that's very clear from talking to members of this committee. Also, we're talking with law enforcement, but I just seek the opportunity to continue to work on the issue, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. So that's how, it was opened, and he said some things that we covered in our build up to this moment, which is that the Supreme Court has suggested that there is some conflict within the two rulings, which could cause confusion for not only people like yourself and myself, but for law enforcement. And somebody asked, if you heard, he said, I'd like to get the bill through and held on second reading. So again, I'm just going to share some things that I've learned. If I get this wrong, please comment, correct me, because I am just trying to learn. But a bill must be read 3 times before it's signed into law. This is something I've talked to elected representatives about in the past. There are like little ways around that, but that's Illinois politics. And that is something, by the way, the loopholes and the escape hatches around the process. That's something that I talk about with Ray Long in that episode that I'm about to release on colememo.com/Patreon. So there's always a way around something. Nothing's ever dead in Springfield. There's so many euphemisms for what goes on in our state capital. But if you heard, Tarver said, we're going to get the bill through and we're going to hold it on second reading so that we can try to find a middle ground, try to work together. And somebody asks, can you just confirm that I heard you correctly? That bill will be held, right? And well, let's watch the clip.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, as to the agreement to hold on second, do I understand that correct? There is an agreement to hold on second?
That is correct. I've spoken with, I believe, yourself, folks on my side as well as law enforcement you see behind me with that commitment. That is correct.
And just to be clear for the record, what is that agreement? Will there have to be a consensus among the stakeholders before it to move, or I just want to make sure I understand what the commitment is on the whole.
It's a fair question. I have never made it a practice to say that I'll get absolutely everybody on board, because then that kind of ties my hand. But I've always been somebody who works in good faith. I don't anticipate a scenario in which all of law enforcement remains opposed. Members of my side will remain opposed. You remain opposed, and the bill still moves. So that's a long-winded way of saying I commit to working diligently and in good faith with all the stakeholders, your side, my side, law enforcement, who I consider to not be either side, to try to put something forward that makes sense.
Okay, a lot to address in that clip. I'm curious what you all think as I move through these things. Before we get to that, somebody said, well, let's be honest, nothing in the Illinois Senate gets out of committee or allowed to proceed except on the word of Don Harmon. He has control of the Illinois Senate. Yeah. I will just say, this is like sort of related to this comment that you've made. It's a concept that I covered in my mini documentary, which you can watch now at colememo.com/minidoc, where there was a similar dynamic with the former speaker of the House that I mentioned earlier, Michael Madigan, where, basically things did not move out of committee unless he wanted them to. So first off, they said, he said, I'm not going to make a promise that, everybody's going to be on board, which I was like, okay, yeah, sounds good. Sounds similar to what Senator Ventura said in the Senate hearing that I was talking about in the intro, where she was asked, hey, Senator, is there anything we can do because law enforcement opposes this bill? Is there any middle ground here? And she said, quote, we are at an impasse. End quote. In other words, she said, look, we've had these conversations for years. We're not getting anywhere. There's no middle ground on this. And so I thought it was interesting that he started it off where he was like, look, I've never made any promise to make sure that everybody agreed to my bill. I thought it was interesting there at the end. If you can hear my cat meowing, I apologize. It's meow hour, apparently. I thought it was interesting towards the end. He said, people on my side, people on your side, and law enforcement, who I view to be in the middle. I don't view law enforcement to be in the middle of this. I view them very much to be on the opposition of this because they are, if you look at the witness slips, which I've got linked in most of my coverage in the past, they fill up a majority of the opposition to this bill. In other words, they are not for this bill. They seem to be the loudest voice against this bill. If you look through the list, and I actually spoke to Jason Brown from Illinois News Joint in one of my most recent episodes, and he actually asked me, is there anybody else that you see on the opposition list? And it's like normal people. And it's possible that I'm missing some because they've filled out hundreds and hundreds of opposition slips, but by and large, you just see police departments. And so I don't know. Maybe he was just being charitable, but I don't view law enforcement as being in the middle on this. I view them as very much being against this. And then, of course, people like yourself, if you're watching this show, or myself, we're very much for this change because we view it as meaningful reform. So let's get into some questions that came up regarding DUIs, driving under the influence. And there's some really good back and forth on this topic. So, and someone said, alt cat meows back. He actually just trills. Hell yeah. Love cats. Anyways, let's watch this clip with questions about DUI and maybe more. Here we go.
There is a concern I have as it relates, ever since we've legalized cannabis for recreational use, around intoxicated motorists. We have seen, according to a Chicago Tribune article from 2023, after legalization, an increase for fatal crashes. The rate of fatal crash drivers who tested positive for marijuana rose from 25% in the 2 years before legalization to 37% in 2020, the first year of legalization. And there have been other studies and information that shows there has been an increase in intoxicated motorists under the influence of cannabis. The issue we have, number one, is there are some potential problems in our current DUI statute as it relates to cannabis, and the changes in that statute that occurred prior to legalization and with legalization have created some gaps that have been identified by law enforcement and prosecutors. Even defense attorneys have identified these issues. Added to that is the lack of a standard and also roadside testing similar to a breathalyzer. So the issue I have with changing the provisions related to the smell or the odor of raw cannabis is that we're going to make this issue that has been identified as an issue even worse. And my preference would be to resolve those intoxicated motorist issues before we start making changes to the cannabis statute in your direction.
I'll say this. I don't think any of us disagree about a collective desire to reduce fatalities in general, no matter how somebody's intoxicated or otherwise. So I will share that with you. I don't know the nuances of the gaps that you identified, but I'm happy to have that conversation. What I will say is that the underlying thing for a lot of these bills, your community and my community may be different, right? And so some of the concerns of folks in my community is how broad some of these things are, and everybody may not be policed the same, right? That's not an indictment on Tipsworth or Cabello or Sheehan, whatever, right? It's just the reality that it's human, right? And so my goal is ultimately to work towards something that makes sense, not something that ties the hands of law enforcement, right? Not something that also allows something that's wide enough, again, that people say drive a truck through, something that makes sense. I mean, the Supreme Court clearly is, I think, to some extent asking us to do something because they're interpreting, Burn versus Raw, coming up with two different opinions, and then saying that we probably need to amend the vehicle code. So if your position is, hey, look, why don't we look at things holistically? I'm never going to say no to that, right? Can I say that the bill that comes back that we work on related to cannabis is going to include things related to alcohol? I cannot say that for sure. What I can say is if you have a concern in that regard, I'm happy to talk to you about that and work toward whatever is going to keep people safe. I don't care what they look like at all. I want to keep people safe the same way that you do. How we arrive there may be different, but it's a conversation I think that's worth having.
The issue isn't so much around alcohol intoxication. The law, I think, is pretty well developed there. It's the fact that after legalization, the law really, as it relates to cannabis intoxicated motorists, has not been developed and is causing gaps and creating large issues with enforcement, which has resulted in increased fatal accidents. At least I believe you can draw a line that connects those. So I do appreciate your openness to being willing to potentially address that issue as well. And, the Supreme Court with its decisions has created a distinction between raw cannabis and burnt cannabis. I would probably go a different direction than you. I think the odor of burnt cannabis suggests maybe there is an intoxicated driver, and that should be the cause for a continued detention or stop at the time and potential search. But I appreciate your answer, and I think this is an issue on the motorist aspect that we really need to address to make sure our roads are safe.
What's so frustrating about that clip is that he acknowledges himself, the person that was asking the question related to concerns on DUI, that he would probably be more concerned if you smell burnt cannabis, which the Supreme Court already ruled on. It's out of the legislature's hands. The Supreme Court ruled that police cannot search based on the smell of burnt cannabis. We're talking about raw cannabis. So how does that relate to driving under the influence? Folks, we're live right now. Comment below and we could display your comment. Somebody just asked the same question. Why is he bringing up intoxication? We're talking about, I'm guessing that's why you brought it up or why you asked this question here. We're talking about raw cannabis, and he himself acknowledges that the smell of burnt cannabis, as if he could tell the difference. I don't mean to judge him, but he does not look like a person that maybe has as much as experience as myself or you if you're watching this show right now. Maybe I'm judging a book by its cover, but anyways, we are live and it says we have like 43 people tuned in right now, and I'm just getting a few comments. I'm not trying to be a comment, No, I am. Make the comments rain, even if it's just a thumbs up, please. I just want to know if you're finding value in what I'm doing right now, because it does take a lot of time and effort to do this, and any feedback is always appreciated, even if it's just a rock on, Cole, or whatever. If you don't have any questions, if I'm making it clear, I'm not asking you to make up questions. But if you are enjoying the show, please smash that like button and drop a comment. I'll display it on screen. I would really appreciate it. So back to this question that somebody just dropped. They said, somebody said, oh, thanks, Brandon. I didn't mean to click on your comment. They said comment for Cole. Somebody said, why is he bringing up intoxication? So let's a representative who has actually been on my show in the past took that response head on. Let's watch his response to that.
I do want to say Leader Windhorst's questions talking about determining those who are intoxicated and driving. That's a very complicated issue, which really is related but different and distinct from what you are trying to do here. The Illinois Supreme Court had two different rulings, as a reminder, one dealing with burnt cannabis, one dealing with raw, which is why we're here. I think Leader Tarver is committed to continuing to work on a solution to address those two rulings, but those rulings really did have to do with probable cause as opposed to intoxication and impairment. The intoxication and impairment issue dealing with cannabis impairment is a national issue. It's a scientific issue, one that we have not resolved as a country, and I don't think we should have an expectation Leader Tarver will solve that in the next coming weeks or years, because it's complicated. And so I do want to distinguish that in expectations. So again, this is something that has been a challenge for many, many years. Many of our law enforcement partners that are here have been working with me, with Representative Cassidy, with others on this issue for many years, and it is very complicated, but I think it's indisputable that black and brown drivers are dealing with this on a daily basis in a way that white drivers are not. So I don't think we should lose sense of why we're here and the importance of getting this right, because we can talk about the ability for law enforcement to do what they're doing and do what they have to do to make sure we're not having drug trafficking across state lines, which is a priority of mine, as well as the fact that the standard that we have today is creating disproportionate impact on drivers. So thank you, Leader Tarver, and I'm going to keep working with you, and we're going to get this done.
I am laughing right now because somebody commented and said, I want cannabis leaves on my wallpapers like theirs. If you didn't see it, I'm going to play that clip again one more time because I did not notice that. That's super funny. I'm just going to play a little bit of this clip because you can really see the wallpaper in that clip. Look on the wall And I do apologize for replaying a clip, but just look on the wall. It does look like cannabis leaves on the walls.
I do want to say, Leader Windhorst's questions talking about determining those who are.
Do you see that? Good eye, cat on the internet. That's good eye. Okay, again, please comment below if you're enjoying this. I got another clip to reference here in a second, but let's read some comments. Somebody said, the assumption is anyone who possesses is using, which is a basic flaw of the law, but more importantly, it's the implementation of bias, except you are allowed to be biased against our community. Fellow Cole Cram here. When we look at it as a social justice issue, it may help it upheld at second reading. Maybe I feel like I read that wrong or I'm reading that wrong. Please re-comment just in case. I feel like I butchered your comment somehow. Maybe I'm just, I don't know. Somebody said puritanical BS. Genetic Memory Farms, I just want to say I really appreciate you. You tune in all the time. You make sure to drop comments after the fact. You're always smashing that like button. You're always participating as the show goes on. And I wanted to let you know I truly do appreciate you. I know I say that all the time when I respond to your comments, but seriously, it means a lot to have your support. Somebody said, let me see the factual evidence that ties into higher increase of DUI to the smell of raw cannabis. Yeah, that's a good point. I did in my article find the Chicago Tribune article that representative was referencing when they said the increase in DUIs. So if you want to check that out, check out the article that I linked. It is from the Chicago Tribune, and you can check that out. Brandon, who I actually, so just a backstory before I read this comment out loud. I met Brandon. You remember I told you earlier in the show that this hearing was supposed to be scheduled a few times and didn't happen. Well, one of the times that it was supposed to happen, I drove to Springfield. I actually bought cannabis that Brandon ultimately paid for. He paid me back for, and some. He paid, like, I really appreciate that of you, Brandon. I bought some cannabis from a dispensary in Springfield. I brought it to the hearing. It made the whole hearing room smell like cannabis, and they ultimately rescheduled the fucking hearing, which was just a bummer. So afterwards, I met Brandon outside of the Capitol. We blazed up some weed that he had. I was like, fuck it, let's open up this weed that I brought, or that I bought, which ended up being horrible. But what else can we expect? It's from Illinois. Hey, there's another one. Dissing on Illinois cannabis. Sorry. There's some good cannabis, I guess, in Illinois. I just don't buy it. I grow my own or get it from people that grow their own, or I go to Michigan, and occasionally I will say I go to Illinois dispensaries, but it's like in a pinch. So Brandon said, I'm just tuning in and missed most of the show, but I would like to tell you that I spoke to someone today who was recently pulled over and had their car searched over the smell of cannabis. That's a freaking bummer. It looks like they also said his car was impounded. Want to guess what color he is? No, I don't. I don't want to guess, but that sucks. I hate to hear that. Genetic Memory Farm said the solution may be to get a medical license, and then if you have one, like for opiates, they cannot use a blood test for DUI. If you don't, then they can. They can still use a sobriety test as well. I didn't know that. I've heard people say that, but I don't know if that's true. Open question for the audience. What do you know about the DUI testing standards and if they apply to medical cannabis? I'm pretty sure they still apply. And actually, I was about to play a clip where Bob Morgan, who we just watched a clip of, so he said, probably in reference to his work, he said, this is something that has been a challenge for many, many years. It's a scientific issue, one that we have not resolved as a country, and I don't think we should have an expectation that Leader Tarver will solve that in the next coming weeks or years because it's complicated. Let's watch a clip that I played from Representative Morgan. It's actually from one of those episodes that I was telling you about with legal professionals. You remember I was telling you earlier that I did some podcasts with legal professionals on these cases, and during one of those shows, I actually brought up this comment that we're about to watch from Representative Morgan. Here it is.
Still an element, and it continues to be a major problem of intoxication, driving while intoxicated with cannabis, because we don't have a .08, nor do we have technology to even enforce that if we did have any kind of standardization. So there's no per se limit. Illinois actually has a per se limit, but we literally made it up. We made up the per se limit. It's not based on 50, 60 years of driving while intoxicated with alcohol that we know .08 is the average. And yet we all know somebody who's 90 or 100 pounds who drinks one beer and can't drive. And we also know people who drink 12 packs and are just fine because the body absorbs alcohol differently. Same with cannabis. Some people that are regular users are not necessarily impaired, even if they're using quite a bit.
So that was a person that was in, you may rec. So I don't know if you heard me still talking there because I didn't get the clip down quick enough, but let's just, there's a part in that that is so interesting to me. Let's just watch it one more time and then we'll move on to the next clips. So
with cannabis, because we don't have a .08, nor do we have technology to even enforce that if we did have any kind of standardization. So there's no per se limit. Illinois actually
this is the part. Listen to what he says here.
Has a per se limit, but we literally made it up.
We literally made it up.
We made up the per se limit. It's not based on 50, 60 years of driving while intoxicated with alcohol that we know .08 is the average. And yet we all know somebody who's.
So anyways, you saw that one. Okay. So speaking of per se limit, if you go to, this could be another teaching opportunity. Let me share this. If you go to colememo.com and search up per se limit, I've got an episode 97, and it's called Illinois Cannabis Per Se Limit, an Impossible Standard as Interpreted. And this is a super sciencey episode. I fucking talked to a person, learned a bunch of science, and if you pop quiz me on it right now, I would fail it because it was something. I give a whole presentation during this episode, and I share testimony from a court case. Excuse me. And one piece of testimony that I share that I think is super powerful is from somebody who doesn't even believe cannabis should be legal. And they say that the way that a lab within the state of Illinois is conducting tests to determine the per se limit is problematic and should really be looked at closer. And there's been even some reporting since I did that episode on a slightly different topic, but concerning the same exact lab that I focused on. It's actually a lab from the University of Illinois, Chicago, questioning their tactics. And I think what we talked about with Jason from Illinois News Joint the other day is that the people that were charged with these crimes, at least in the case, not the case that I was covering, but the case that was widely reported by the media, these people got exonerated. Now, the case that I covered in episode 97 is slightly different. And the reason that I think it's so notable that somebody who doesn't believe cannabis should be legal is, I can't believe I'm even saying this right now. You probably get why it's notable. Somebody who does not believe cannabis should be legal is saying the way that we are enforcing the per se limit is problematic. And based on their experience, these people are not actually intoxicated when the lab is saying they're intoxicated. I think that's powerful. By the way, I've had people from the organization that person is from. It's called Smart Approaches to Marijuana, which you might have guessed is not exactly what it sounds like because they do oppose cannabis from being legal. If you want to see some episodes I did with some people from Smart Approaches to Marijuana, you can see a number of episodes here. You can find these episodes at colememo.com/Sam. And actually, in one of them, I had somebody from the National Organization of Reforming Marijuana Laws, aka NORML, and a person from SAM on for a good old-fashioned debate. So if you like hearing people argue about the legality of cannabis, which I do, maybe check out that episode. So, all right, well, let's get into some more clips. Because this is where it starts to get wild. This is where it starts to get heated. Genetic Memory Farms says, thanks, man, back at you. Not many people trying to do what you do for the community. That means a lot. Thank you. Thank you, seriously, for saying that. That does mean a lot to me. So this next clip to me is wild. And I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say about it. Please, as you're watching, if you have any thoughts that come up, drop them in the comments. If I don't address it, I'll be sure to include your comments on it. I know everybody has unique takes on everything. I wasn't expecting this. So here we go. Somebody that's opposed to the bill. Here's what their concerns were.
The way we're striking odor out of this legislation is going to make it virtually impossible to enforce other aspects of the legislation. And the example I have is we've stricken odor, and we can't search a vehicle based on odor alone, but we still have the provision that it has to be in a child restraint container. Well, I can't tell by the smell if it's in a child restraint container or child resistant container, or not. And I'm just worried about, we always talk about children who end up finding drugs and things like that, and those unintended consequences to kids. These two pieces kind of went together. So we could search a vehicle based on the odor and find the other underlying problems that may be going on in that. So I guess that would be my first question, is how do we handle, keeping our kids safe when drugs may be in the car that kids can easily get into? Well, if we can't search the vehicle based on the smell of odor, so we smell cannabis in a vehicle, and let's say it's a mom or a dad with 2 or 3 young kids in the car, and we smell cannabis, raw cannabis, not burnt cannabis, 2 distinct smells, and I can't search the car now based on odor alone, but there's a possibility those young kids could find that cannabis in the car, and and if I can smell it, it's probably not in a child resistant container.
What? Are you guys thinking what I'm thinking? What the hell is he talking about? I'm not even high right now. Was he high? I'm just joking. He was not. He definitely was not high. And I do apologize for my colorful commentary. Some might say I should be more professional, but I'd like to think it gives me, I don't know. Who knows? I like having fun. Okay. So I just am like trying to wrap my head around this. And you'll see the sponsor. I'm about to play a short clip from the sponsor of the legislation who responds to that in a moment. Let's just watch his response. His response is just absolutely perfect. So let me make sure I got this right. Here's his response to that question.
So those clues,
your concern is that a child may be able to get to the cannabis?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's
okay. I think that's the perfect response. We're talking about odor. Look, I'm not even going to try to. I've never tried to say. I mean, I think it is silly that cannabis is required to be in an odor-proof container, because you look at alcohol, for example, something that we know people can die from, something we know is super harmful. I'm not saying cannabis is not harmful, by the way. I think smoking anything is probably not good for you. But he seems to make an association between the odor-proof packaging and the child-proof packaging. And if he says something to the effect of, if I can smell it, then it's not in child-proof container. No, if you can smell it, it's not in an odor-proof container, buddy. That's what this fucking hearing's about. I just don't understand. And to be concerned, okay, so if a kid is in a car with his parents, and your concern is that if cannabis smells that they could get into it, first of all, that's something for the parent to worry about, in my humble opinion. I'm not a father. I'm not a parent. I don't have any aspirations right now to be one. But that's just wild. It's just wild. I don't even know what to say. Someone said, is there a child in the car, or is there a child in the state of Illinois? Yeah. Brandon says he is just under the assumption that all cannabis users are criminals and he has to bust them somehow. I don't know. I think that Representative Tarver had the perfect reaction to it. Let's just watch that one more time. It's just perfect. It's just.
So those
Your concern is that a child may be able to get to the cannabis?
Yes.
Okay. And
And that's all.
I mean, it literally has nothing to do if like that is on the parent, first of all, but that has nothing to do with the substance of what we're talking about today, which is an odor-proof container. Like, how does an odor-proof container protect a child? Who does an odor-proof container protect? Who does an odor-proof container protect? Other than people that maybe don't enjoy the smell of cannabis? Like, I guess it protects you because you're like, I don't like the smell of cannabis. So that's who it's protecting. I don't. I just that was one, like I said, that I just got completely lost on. And my friend Mason asks, "Oh Lord, what did I miss?" You missed a lot already, so you're gonna have to watch this one back. We've been watching clips from today's odor-proof hearing, and boy, oh boy, there was a lot of stuff said. Genetic Memory Farms says, this kind of makes me ask if our level of concern is that kids we. I think you maybe hit enter on that comment before you meant. I feel like I get what you're trying to say, but I don't know. When I think of that Simpsons meme, it's like, oh, won't somebody think of the children? That's what I think of when that comes up. Now, this next clip we're gonna watch really gets down to it. This one isn't. This one is truly the reason that I think there is opposition to this bill. I've covered this on the show in the past. I actually covered it, those episodes that I've mentioned a few times now with licensed legal professionals. I actually played a clip from all the way back in 2019 when this concern was originally aired. And it's about trafficking. But really quick, Cole says hockey's going to overtime. Watching both. Oh man, I picked the wrong night to go live. It's hockey night, huh? All right. Well, anyways, the concerns about the odor-proof container, really, when you get down to it, it's not only on having a skeleton key into people's cars, but the reason I've heard consistently used over the years is regarding trafficking of, I would say, large scale trafficking of cannabis. They also lump other drugs into it, but I think it really has to do with large scale trafficking of cannabis. And we'll play the clip, but really quick, somebody else commented, who is responsible for the sealed odor-proof container, the dispensary or the consumer? I think technically the bill, I could be wrong here, and I could look this up. Let's see. I'll look this up while we're watching this clip, but I think technically, before I give you an answer, I'm going to look it up. Let's watch this clip. So it is this one.
I, as a trained police officer, can't tell the difference in the smell of raw cannabis on an amount, whether it's 1 ounce or 100 pounds. There's no difference in the smell. Our trained canines can't tell the difference either. They just alert to an amount. So your unintended consequence here is going to open up the door to drug trafficking immensely. Because all a person would have to do is have a small bag of marijuana with them and 100 pounds in the trunk. But so that's why, look, I understand there's a difference between burnt and raw, and we can have that discussion. But when you're talking about raw, we're not, in my mind, I'm talking about trafficking. That's what worries me. So I'm curious in your mind how we continue to try to get the traffickers off the street and still live in the letter of what you have here.
Well, my response to that is stop arresting people for cannabis, period. And I'm taking that from some cat on the internet who you can see I'm displaying their comment of. And yeah, Mason's laughing at 100 pounds in the trunk. I love that idea. Well, you can just put a baggie in the front and then have 100 pounds in the trunk. Well, no, you can't actually, because a baggie is not well, it might be sealed and it may be resealable, which is part of the requirement for cannabis containers. But I can tell you one thing, a baggie is not childproof. a baggie is not childproof, and therefore, even if we made this change to the law, that would still be a problem, actually. Having cannabis in a baggie, which I know seems whack, but again, I'm not gonna start fighting on that hill yet about about the childproof packaging. It is kind of funny though, like this hemp drink that I showed earlier that you can get at drinkcantrip.com/colememo, 15% off, 15% goes back to me. They have a childproof lit top on their can, which is like weird to open, but it's actually kind of cool. It's resealable, which I guess meets the definition of an Illinois law, even though this falls outside of the CRTA. I think it's kind of ridiculous that cannabis has to be in childproof containers. And honestly, some of the containers you buy cannabis in, I don't think are childproof. There's literally a brand, I won't name them. Comment below if you know who I'm talking about, though, that does sell their cannabis in a bag that literally looks like a sandwich bag. And every time I see it, I'm like, is that? I don't know. It might be childproof, but it doesn't look like it. Okay, before I watched that video, somebody asked, who is responsible for the sealed odor-proof container, the dispensary or the consumer? I think the answer is both, unfortunately. So looking at the law here, it says cannabis product packaging and labeling. Any product containing cannabis shall be sold in a sealed, odor-proof, and child-resistant container. So that's that. And that's actually the only time that odor-proof appears in the CRTA, because as the Supreme Court ruling points out, I'll try to find this really quick. Odor-proof container vehicle code. This was actually added to the vehicle code. So yeah, display this right here. So in the Illinois vehicle code, it's not even in the CRTA. The odor-proof language is in the vehicle code. And so basically, if you're in a vehicle, you must have it in you must have cannabis in a secured, sealed, or resealable, odor-proof, child-resistant cannabis container. And fun fact, back in the day, the law used to just say sealed, odor-proof, child-resistant container. And law enforcement was actually, they'd pull people over, and if you had opened your cannabis container, which I'm once again trying to see if I could find one. Here, I've got one from Sun Drenched Farms. And this is a lot like the cannabis you might find in a dispensary. You've seen bags like this sold in a dispensary. They would try to make the argument that because you see this rip at the top, they would say, well, it's no longer sealed. Well, yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. It's actually a resealable container. And so, yes, sun-drenched is hemp, but it's cannabis, right? I'm just trying to give an example of a container. Definitely check out our friends at sundrenchedfarm.com. You can buy some THCA hemp, federally legal cannabis, as I like to say, right off their website. Get it straight to your door. Comes probably in a bag like this. Anyways, the point is, in the past, law enforcement would try to say, well, you've already opened that container, so it's no longer sealed. Well, we added or resealable to the language, and that pretty much solved that. So let's see. Some more comments are coming in, and we'll get to a response from the person that introduced this legislation on those trafficking concerns that were aired. Mason says, who by the way is from sundrenchedfarm.com, he said, I had 15 pounds. Oh, wait, I don't know if that's what you're saying. 15 of legal hemp in mine the other day, and it's easy to spot. 100 bricks would stand out in a standard car's trunk, if that's even possible. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So Genetic Memory Farm says, then aren't all dispensaries breaking the letter of the law by selling it in a non-odor-proof container? They're asking that question. And I believe actually that's an idea we discussed with lawyers. And if it's in one of those 2 episodes that I've been sharing, that's also featured in the main article that we're going through today, that I just published today on coolmemo.com. I believe in one of those episodes, probably the second one, because that's when we're talking about the odor-proof container. I believe we discussed that exact idea that maybe somebody needs to sue the dispensaries. And you know what? I've been thinking about that lately because if you notice, especially the folks like Cole here, I'm displaying their comment, and others who have signed witness slips. What at least I've noticed about the witness slips is that I've not seen. I could be wrong. So if you did do this and I'm missing you, yell at me about this. But I don't believe I saw a large number of industry participants supporting this bill. And it would be helpful, first of all, if they did. But I can't help but wonder if the reason people in the industry, like people that own dispensaries, are hesitant to support this bill is if that question came up like, hey, aren't you supposed to sell it in an odor-proof container? They would say, yeah, I guess I am. It could put them in a rough spot. And so one of the things I talked with the lawyers about, or one lawyer actually said to me is like, hey, well, maybe somebody needs to sue the dispensary for selling cannabis that's not in an odor-proof container. I actually don't really like that idea. And look, I'm not one to side with the industry. Again, it goes back to my point. Odor-proof to who? Because again, they are using canines. So I think that that's a hard standard to meet, and I don't expect the dispensary to meet it. And by the way, I haven't mentioned this in the show already, and I need to mention this more often. Illinois is alone. There is not another state in these United States that requires cannabis to be in an odor-proof container. It's very much an Illinois thing. Thank you, police, for that. Brandon said it's not that they're just not supporting it. They're not telling their customers about it. Thank you. Yeah, that'd be really fucking helpful if dispensaries would take or would share some of this information and get some good support behind it so that we could, just get this thing through. Because the only opposition from my standpoint is law enforcement. The commenter, some cat on the internet says, so if the odor-proof container meets the requirement of one law, can the regulation of the traffic rules override the law? I don't know. That's a good question. I have no idea. All right. Well, we just watched a clip where somebody aired concerns about trafficking, and this was the response from the person that has introduced this legislation in the House. So again, this person says, well, if you're just tuning in now, one of the representatives said, if you smell cannabis, you can't smell the weight of the cannabis. So I can't smell. And by the way, that's going to come back up at the end of the show here in a bit, the weight of cannabis. Because again, it seems like the concern here is people that are trafficking large amounts. So put that in the back of your head. They say, well, your bill is going to make it so that people can traffic through the state. It leaves it wide open so that people can traffic through the state. Well, here was Representative Tarver's response to that.
It's a great question. I think this is what will provide the seminal basis of our disagreement. What you're saying my bill does, and it broadens the scope for traffickers. What the law does right now is leave it very, very wide open for particularly black and brown people to be discriminated against when they're pulled over. Because the issue that we're having is everybody's not being policed the same. So I hear you about the traffickers. I don't want traffickers either. But I also want to be able to drive down the street and have the same respect and dignity and treatment overall as everybody else. And that's what's not happening. So I think that's the reason why you see a difference with positions on this bill, is because what you're saying makes sense. Nobody wants to tie their hands on law enforcement as it relates to traffickers. I also want to be able to drive through Orland Park and feel just the same way I do in Gage Park or Washington Park or any other park. And that's an issue. And I haven't heard anything to control for that and to solve that issue. And that's a very important issue in my community.
I'm not sure why the video went out at the end of that clip. Maybe the man's trying to shut us down. I thought that was a great response. And I'm sorry, I'm not really worried about large scale traffickers. I thought that when we legalized cannabis, at least in the context of cannabis, honestly, I'm kind of not really worried about large scale traffickers of anything. But let's just talk about cannabis for a second. I'm not worried about large scale traffickers of cannabis. And I thought that when we legalized cannabis, these are the first words from the law. And I'm sorry if you guys are getting tired of me pointing this out, but the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, which is what legalized cannabis, and I say that in air quotes because I don't think cannabis is truly legal until you can buy, sell, use, possess, grow, gift as much as you want, need, or please. I don't think if you say limit, I don't think that is completely legal, but I talk about that on my mini documentary. You can check that out for free now at colememo.com/minidoc. The first few words from the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, sometimes called the CRTA, are as follows. In the interest of allowing law enforcement to focus on violent and property crime, the General Assembly finds and declares that the use of cannabis should be legal and for persons 21 years of older and should be taxed and regulated in a manner similar to alcohol. I want to reread these first few words again. I want to reread these first few words from the law again. In the interest of allowing law enforcement to focus on violent and property crimes. In other words, you shouldn't be concerned about traffickers at all. Man, that just gets that grinds my gears. It's just crazy. Well, here's where things in the hearing started to get heated. So we're talking about a disparity in traffic stops, right? That's what the representative just brought up. Really quick, some cat on cannabis or some cat on the internet, probably on cannabis too, not to make any assumptions, but you're watching this show. They say for 50 years, the police have used cannabis or the smell of cannabis as a way to pierce the search warrant requirement. Exactly. And that's what this is about. And that's what I think that's why this law exists, because they want what an attorney on my mini documentary refers to as a skeleton key into your car. Once again, you can watch that at colememo.com/minidoc. It's literally scrolling across the bottom of the screen right now. Okay. So we're talking about the disparity in traffic stops, and this is where some things start to get heated during the hearing. So here we go.
It's a great question. I think this is what will provide the seminal basis of our disagreement. What you're saying my bill does, and it broadens the scope for traffickers. What the law does right now is leave it very, very wide open for particularly Black and brown people to be discriminated.
Okay, we already watched that clip, but it was good to repaste that for a second. This is where things start to get heated. Let's watch.
I'm going to push back a little bit on that statement. I think maybe that's relative to the community you live in. Where you live, majority of the folks are Black and brown folks. Where I live, they're not. So the traffic stops in my area.
That's an assumption that you made. You don't know where I live, but go ahead.
But I think I think some of that is relative, though. So it says in here that if there is a person in the vehicle 21 years of age or older. So all that takes is one person, and they don't have to be the driver. They can be the occupant. And I could have 3 16-year-olds in the car. But I can't search the vehicle if there's one person over 21 years of age because potentially they're old enough to buy recreational marijuana. Again, we are, I think, turning a blind eye to kids who could still be in possession and using drugs based on this one loophole of having a 21-year-old in the car.
I'll tell you, the goalposts move on this issue. First, we're worried about kids getting access to it. I guess that's still kind of being worried about kids getting access to it, but it's just like, again, I asked this on the show the other day, and I'll pull it up here, but a defense attorney sent me some rhetorical questions, and I'm curious if any of you have an answer to this. Is this a law designed to be obeyed? Is this a law designed to be obeyed or to be broken? If it's designed to be obeyed, what policy interest does the rule serve if it's designed to be broken? What does that say about the government's relationship to its people? Fair questions. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Do you know the answer to that? All right. So again, things started to get a little heated there. He said, "You're making assumptions. You don't even know where I live." Here's where it gets a little bit hotter. This is where it gets a little bit hotter.
So let me push back a little bit on that, because what I said at the beginning was Supreme Court said you all should probably consider fixing it. I also said right behind that, this doesn't fix it. So I get your questions and I appreciate them, but I didn't say this paragraph, this is the end all be all, this solves it. What I said was I would like to commit to continue to have conversations, whether it be with you individually, you all collectively, my side of the aisle, these gentlemen next to me. I'm open to having a conversation. So if you tell me, hey, look, this is creating a loophole and it can potentially be harmful for children, there's no way I'm going to say on the record or even in private, too bad. Okay, let's figure it out. So I hear you. I appreciate you expressing the concerns, but my response is going to typically be, except as it relates to how people are policed maybe differently, the other things, sure, let's have a conversation. If that is a concern of yours, if you see me when Windhurst was talking, I'm doing this because I'm jotting down notes.
I appreciate that, but you're trying to have the conversation on the back end now. Not once have you come to me and asked my professional opinion on law enforcement. I don't know that you have any of the other members, maybe you have. But here we sit in committee on the final hours of deadline day, 45 minutes behind, waiting to try to get this bill to the table. We've subbed members out of the majority party. This bill's not ready. I'm very happy to have a discussion with you.
Okay. So stating the obvious, the bill is not ready. I started off with that. I can't control when a bill is called in committee. I think you know that as well. Okay? I've also voted for bills for Republicans. I moved bills out of Revenue Committee for Republicans, as Amy Ellick. She moved one yesterday. Okay? So whether people sub off, all the stuff you're talking about, I help both sides. When there's something that is reasonable, I help both sides. When there's something that still needs work, I help both sides. I did not come down here and run a bill down your throat. I have a conversation with anybody. And it's not on the back end. I have had conversations. When you came to me yesterday, I said, I'm not sure if the bill's going to be called. That's what I said. I came in here this morning. I talked to Kajak. I talked to this gentleman. I've not run from the fact that this is a bill that needs some work. And I will have any conversation, but I would take great offense to the notion that I'm somehow sandbagging or wouldn't talk to you. I talk to every single person. I'm on your side of the aisle every single day. Every single day. I come over and speak to folks about something that's not related to this bill. So I take offense to that.
All right. And at that point, the chairperson cut off the hearing. If you guys would like to see everything that was discussed in that hearing, it is in the article that I've been sharing for most of this episode. I just pasted it in the YouTube comments if you're watching on YouTube right now. And if you come back at a later time, if the show notes aren't there yet, if you look in the description of the video, or if you're listening to this on whatever podcasting platform, if you look in the description, there should be a link to the show notes, which will have links to everything that I've discussed in this show. So if you want to see everything that was said during this hearing, I actually published a transcript, which I've not seen anywhere else. So a little bit of exclusive info for you. And I'll just display one more time the headline on screen if you're wanting to search it up now. If you go to thecolememo.com and search up cannabis odor search ban advances in Illinois, but a compromise could undermine its intent. And that brings us to the last note in today's episode. So what did I mean with that little thing in my headline? A compromise could undermine its intent. Well, as you saw through these clips, House lawmakers and law enforcement alike indicate a willingness to keep working towards a solution. On the other hand, during that Senate committee hearing, as I quoted earlier, Senator Rachel Ventura took a different approach, stating that despite years of discussion with law enforcement, quote, "we are at an impasse," end quote. I think this highlights a contrast between the tone in the Senate and the more conciliatory approach that we've seen in the House. It seems like the House is trying to find middle ground on an issue that there is no middle ground on. This is my personal opinion. This is where we get into something interesting, and I'm really worried about this bill at this point. According to a source familiar with the ongoing negotiations, House makers are already considering a potential amendment that's being described as a compromise. The amendment would retain the requirement for the odor-proof containers and the clarification that burnt cannabis alone does not establish probable cause. According to my source, the amendment would also include new language stating that if an officer detects the odor of raw cannabis, they may briefly detain. I don't even know. I need to look at the language actually. I believe it's just that they may detain an individual aged 21 or older solely to inform them of the legal possession limits, and they would require that the cannabis be produced for weighing. If the amount is within the legal limit, your legal possession limit, the officer would be required to end the stop. If the amount exceeds the legal limit, the officer would then have probable cause to detain the individual and conduct a search. This potential amendment, if introduced, could reshape the debate heading into the next phase of the legislative process. In my opinion, it arguably undermines the intent behind the bill by preserving the ability to initiate stops and hold people based solely on the odor of cannabis, even when no other signs of criminal activity are present. Now, earlier when I said that law enforcement and lawmakers are indicating a willingness to work together, they say that. But one of the things that Jim Kychek did say pretty clearly, I've got it detailed right here. Kychek indicated that the odor-proof container was a key public safety tool and not something law enforcement was willing to give up. He said, quote, "I don't know. I can't tell you that I think there's a solution, that would trade off odorless containers," end quote. He said, quote, "So I don't want to be disingenuous about that," end quote. So it just seems that this odor-proof container is the sticking point. They're not going to give up on it. Fortunately, in the Senate, Senator Ventura basically said, "No, look, there's no more middle ground we can make. This is the deal." Unfortunately, I'm hearing that there could be proposed amendments to allow law enforcement to require somebody to produce cannabis for weighing, which I think is ridiculous. You might as well just keep the law the way that it is, because they're going to find other reasons to get you in trouble while they've got you held while they're weighing your cannabis on the side of the road. That's just nuts. That's just bonkers. And, maybe this won't come to fruition. As Tarver said at the beginning, one of the first few clips we said, he never makes any promises to have everybody on board, because that would tie his hands. But I don't know. I'm a little worried about this because he did promise, and I've detailed this in my article, he did promise, and he started his whole thing off with, we're going to hold this at second reading. Once again, bills have to be read 3 times before they can be voted on by a chamber. And at one point, the chair actually said that Tarver would bring, he said, quote, he, as in Tarver, is committing, if he's blessed to get it on second reading, which he did, he's committing to bringing it back with an amendment. And it's just like, no, don't amend it. Because I want to remind you all that if you amend it, then the Senate has to vote on the bill again. This is already passed through the Senate. At this point, if we could get it to third reading and allow the House to vote on it, it could go to Governor Pritzker's desk to be signed into law. But at this point, folks, I'm a little concerned about this bill. I'm a little bit concerned. It sounds like law enforcement is flexing their power, and we're going to see. We're going to see. They certainly have a lot of influence, it seems. the fact that they've railroaded this so far makes me think that it might be hard to get this through. So folks, with that said, reach out to your House representatives. Make sure that you let them know there's no middle ground on this issue. If you'd like a fact sheet on this issue so that you can more adequately speak on it, go to colememo.com/odorproof. I'll put it on my screen right now. And when you go there, you'll see this fact sheet. And, print it off, send it to your legislators, save it. It's helpful. It allows you to talk about the facts versus the myths behind this bill. And at this point, we really need your support. I know I've been saying that a lot through this whole process, but it really is important. We need your support if we want to make this bill happen. And I wish I had better news tonight. It's kind of not that great of news to share on a Friday night. But what I will say is, I hope that you found value in this episode of the Cole Memo. If you did, please hit that like button and subscribe. Please share my show with your friends if you think they'd find value in it. And just please, please, please say it one more time. I think the third or fourth time. Smash that like button. And if you haven't seen my mini documentary yet, go to colememo.com/minidoc. Here's a brief preview as to what it looks like. Have a great Friday and a great weekend, everybody. Take care.
Beginning January 1st, 2020, the recreational use of cannabis will be legal in the state of Illinois.
Available to stream now, my mini doc dives into the history of Illinois legalization, starting with
January 1st. What should we expect? The biggest thing that we need people to understand is that January 1, in terms of the criminal justice system here in this state, is the end of prohibition.
See how Illinois missed its chance at real cannabis reform with key failures, including the fact that
the program includes regulation on possession limits.
So people can still be arrested for a possession.
And I want to highlight that in its first year of legalized recreational marijuana in the state of Illinois, they arrested 3 times as many black people for possession than any other race.
We've run into so much cannabis, we've run out of places to put it.
I have represented people and taken their cases through the court system who got charged with more serious crimes only because the police said that they smoked cannabis. And not because the police said you have illegal cannabis, or not because you have too much cannabis, or not because you're high on cannabis, but because I can smell it and that's it.
Attorney goes, he understands that he can't be smoking and his cannabis flower shouldn't be open. And I was like, I'd like to say for the record that I was not smoking and my flower was not open.
So that's where we're at right now in Illinois.
Yeah.
And I hope it changes.
Start watching now at colememo.com/minidoc.